Well, hello everyone. Welcome to my episode 4 of Joyful Julie Live. If you don't know me, I am Joyful Julie Griffin, and I'm so excited you guys are here tonight. I've got a good friend of mine that got a blast from the past picture that I'm going to share, but she is a fellow farm girl. If you've been following me very long, you know that I love my animals and the farm and ranch life, and I think you'll enjoy my guest as well. So without further ado, I am going to bring out my friend, Pam Lewison. I should have a drum roll sound effect before I bring guests out, because that would be really fun.
That would be.
I need to look into that for next time. I think that would be a good addition to intros.
Why not? Or you could just have a live band like Jay Leno.
Oh, maybe someday I'll get there when I'm not in a camper.
All right, that's fair.
Yeah, so it's all good.
Yeah.
So how have you been? Tell me how things have been going.
Oh, good. Crazy busy. It's springtime. So my kids are with my parents at the moment because my husband is still seedbed making at the moment. For people who are not farmers, he is dragging a giant piece of equipment behind the tractor to fluff and level our soil to make it ready for corn plant in the next week or so.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I know those, when it's planting season, the time in the tractor gets to be very precious and some days very long.
Yes, I refer to it as being a farm wife widow at this point of the year.
Yep.
And it doesn't really stop because we have hay. So I'll see my husband sometime in November.
Yep. I understand. So that was going to be one of my questions. You're getting ready to plant corn. What else do you guys grow?
So we have alfalfa. We are trying teff this year, which is new.
Okay. Yep.
It's a high protein, low carb forage that you bale a couple times during the course of the growing season. And then we are also growing beans this year. So a little bit of everything.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Very cool.
And then, of course, we have the menagerie of animals also, but that's a different kettle of fish. That's half fun and half income.
Understand. I think that's the way with a lot of animals. It is. So yeah, I meant to ask you this before I brought you out, but were you able to connect your channels?
I didn't, because all my channels are private, so there's no other folks that are gonna jump on.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, that's all right. I do have mine paired to my LinkedIn, my Facebook, my YouTube. So it's out there a lot of places. And so I was going to say, if anybody's watching, drop some comments, because we don't know if you're here if there's no comments. And it's a lot more fun when it's an actual conversation. There's some interaction in the comments with people who are watching. So, and if nobody's watching, then that's okay. Then we can just chat.
Yeah.
So,
well, and I will say, the PR team at Washington Policy Center is appreciative that your channels are not private.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't think mine is private anywhere, really. I actually had to go into Facebook and change some settings so that comments from Facebook would populate to Restream and show up in the chat feed. Oh, and yesterday I did a test and it worked. So that was good. That was real good. So just kind of talk about what your career journey has been. I know you're a couple years older than me, and we were overlapped at WSU for a short window. And then where did life take you from there?
So in undergrad, I earned a degree. I have a BA in creative writing with an emphasis in poetry, which is odd, being a career farm kid. And while I was at WSU, a friend from Dublin offered a bartending gig for the summer. And so attended bar in Ireland for a summer. And
cool.
it changed my entire view of the world, to be
Yeah.
honest. Because, we grew up in a small, fairly rural community. And then I found myself plopped into a city of 3 million people.
Mhm.
In a plane ride. And I got to meet people from all different walks of life and all parts of the world who were very different than me. And so it was a great experience because it sort of just opened my eyes to a whole bunch of different things. And at that time, it was pre 9/11. So I could go anywhere in Europe from Dublin Airport for about $50.
Oh, wow.
And so I did. Anytime I had 2 days off together, I went places. I went to Spain, I went to Portugal, I went to Italy and France and Germany, and I just traveled around. And it gave me a unique opportunity to see most of Western Europe by myself as a 20-year-old college kid. And it was a great experience. I fully encourage everyone to do that if you have the means and the opportunity.
Yeah.
And so when I came back to WSU, as I promised my mother I would, I finished my BA, and much to my surprise and amazement, nobody wanted to hire me to write poetry for a living. And so I worked, I had a really terrible experience working for Washington State for about 9 months, a very administrative job.
Mhm.
And then I came home and I got hired at the local newspaper. And
Okay.
that truly when my work life began. I spent almost a decade as a journalist. And found that I had a knack for telling other people's stories,
Mm.
and I enjoyed it. I mean, to be honest, it gave me a chance to tell stories about people, and tell them from a very intimate perspective,
Mhm.
which is not something that most people get to do. And this was a long time ago. I mean, well, a long time ago. I'm
It's
not
relative. You're not
super
that old.
I mean, I feel old, but I'm not that old. And at that point, for most journalists, myself included, journalism was still about telling good stories and telling stories from both sides of an issue, whatever issue.
Mhm.
And so I started out here locally, essentially as a general assignment and sports reporter. From there, I hopped to a bunch of different papers around the Pacific Northwest. And after doing everything from being a reporter to a photographer to a page designer to an editor, I got really burned out. I was tired. And the thing about being a journalist is that you don't have a regular life, because
Mhm.
page deadline was midnight. So I would get to work at like noon and then leave the office at like midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
It's not really conducive to having a family or a relationship or
Yeah.
anything that most people would consider normal. Um, and so, and I found myself sort of asking questions about journalism is a really insular community. You're sort of a community within a community, not
Mhm.
unlike commerce.
Mhm.
We're sort of a community in a community. And much like journalists, and maybe this is why I was comfortable in journalism, journalism is a very misunderstood career. much like ag is a very misunderstood career.
Absolutely.
And so I was kind of kicking around this idea about how do I marry this job in ag that I love? Because when I was started thinking about this, I was uh, working back at the hometown paper and living on the farm. And so on days off, I was helping with the farm. So I started kicking around this idea, how do I marry this love I have for agriculture with this love I have for storytelling? And a friend of mine who worked at U of I was like, well, why don't you just go to graduate school? I was like, for what?
What's that going to do for me?
I don't have very much debt. Why would I go to graduate school? That sounds like an awful idea.
Yeah.
And she was like, well, but you could get a master's degree in something that was ag related, and with your background in journalism, it would probably be, you'd probably be pretty easy for you to get into graduate school. And so I looked at a bunch of different programs, and I ended up at Texas A&M. I got a master's degree in ag leadership, education, and communications. And while I was there, I taught a bunch of students about what I call real journalism, telling both sides of the story, and at the same time wrote a master's thesis about, we have all this research and information about consumer preferences and what drives consumers to buy the things they buy. But we have basically zero about what drives farmers to do what they do and make the decisions they make. So my master's thesis is about on-farm decision making.
Okay.
Very first research project of its kind.
Very cool.
Yeah, it was probably not fun for my committee chair as we started to figure out how to write my questionnaire and figure out how we were going to do data collection and that sort of thing. But he toughed it out. So shout out to Dr. Billy McKim for letting me do qualitative research when that's just not his bag. And then I left graduate school and came back here, which makes me what is affectionately referred to at Texas A&M as a 1%er. Because only 1% of Texas A&M grads leave Texas.
Interesting.
Yes. So we're rare. We're unicorns.
Unicorns are good.
Right. I mean, maybe not the glitter kind. I'm not really a fan of glitter. It's in fact banned in our house.
Yeah, no, glitter gets everywhere and you keep finding it months later. So no, I'm with you there.
And I did a couple of different things. I worked for the East Columbia Basin Irrigation District, primarily as sort of an outreach coordinator / contract writer for the Augusta Groundwater Replacement Project, to the federal irrigation project. I ran communications for the Washington State Cattlemen's Association. And partway through that job, a friend of mine said, hey, Washington Policy Center has this opening for what is effectively a public policy analyst that focuses on ag-specific public policy. I think you'd be really good at it. And I was like, I don't even know what that is. She said, just do me a favor and apply for the job, okay?
Yeah.
And I was like, all right, well, thank you for being bossy. I have a mom. But I applied for the job anyway. And that was 3.5 years ago. And I tell people still, it is the job I never knew I always wanted.
That's awesome.
I get to, on the one hand, tell ag stories, and on the other, advocate for my community.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it really is.
That's such a great way to marry your two passions, which sounds like it's exactly what you were looking for when you went to grad school. And fun fact, I don't know if you know this, but AgCom was my undergrad. I just went
Yes.
to Oklahoma State for that. So
Orange is not my color wheel.
it wasn't for me until I moved to Oklahoma. And actually, I had a really hard time with it because, growing up in Pacific Northwest as a Cougar, orange OSU was always Oregon State Beavers. Like, who's going to wear orange? So, but no, it kind of grew on me. So
It's funny,
and I had
the number of people I know who went to Oklahoma State is staggering.
yeah, there's a lot. There's a lot of people from out of state come, and then
Well,
um,
what's even funnier is that I tried to apply to Oklahoma State, but I couldn't get anybody to get back to me.
no,
So there's that.
they lost out big time.
I mean, Texas A&M has cooler jewelry, so I don't have my Aggie ring on. I should go get it. But
you should. If you're going to talk about it, you need to show it off.
They do have better jewelry, so there's that.
It's all right. I won't hold it against you.
I do. I think it's interesting. What I think is actually really interesting about my job is that, aside from being clearly tailor-made for me,
Absolutely,
is that I am the only person who does what I do in the sort of group of organizations that I do it for. So,
okay.
Washington Policy Center is part of a group of state think tanks, and no other state think tanks have a dedicated staff person who specifically focuses on agriculture. I'm the only one in 51 think tanks.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So I really
and those all fall under the Washington Policy Center umbrella.
So they all fall under the umbrella of the State Policy Network.
Okay.
And Washington Policy Center is one of them.
Okay.
So there's 51 different think tanks throughout the United States. And in all of them, I am the only person who has a very specific focus on agriculture only, because everything that I cover is specifically related to ag.
Mm-hmm. That's incredible.
Unlike the other ones.
You would think there'd be other, agriculture is such a big industry in so many states. You would think it would have a higher priority.
I think it is indicative of my experience that people forget about agriculture and food production as being important, because I think we all sort of take for granted, even in the midst of the pandemic and the lockdowns last year, and I think they were probably more prevalent on the coasts, but you forget that that food has to come from somewhere, and that primarily it comes from people who live in rural communities and grow it, or in the case of meat production, and that is something that most people take for granted because you go to the grocery store and it's just there. So I think the focus on food policy sort of falls by the wayside.
Yeah, I can see that. I know a lot of people that I talk to are just fascinated at the whole process of how things get to their table. And it's it doesn't just magically appear. There are people out there like us that toil in the soil and grow it. And if it wasn't for us, you wouldn't eat. Being in a very food secure nation has, I think, made us all very complacent, maybe is the right word, when it comes to having the food on our shelves.
I think complacent and picky. Because I think, particularly now, if you look at the movement toward well, I will only have things that are non-GMO and grown organically and that sort of thing. We sort of
Mhm.
forget that there are places in the world where poverty means you you eat suboptimal cuts of meat,
Mhm.
or for that matter, meat is a luxury, uh,
Absolutely.
and um, you are hungry enough that you don't care if it was organically grown in
Mhm.
in a hydroponic setting or whatever the case may be. Your priority is, does it have calories, is it affordable, and is it available to me? End
Yeah.
of discussion. And I think we've sort of lost that. And I think for me, being able to travel at 20 years old and see different parts of the world, and granted it's Western Europe, it's not like I was traveling in sub-Saharan Africa,
Right.
but there are still certainly food deserts in Western Europe, just like there are in the United States.
Mhm.
And I think, when people say, well, I will only eat this, for me, it is the purest definition of first world problems.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, that's privilege to a max.
Yes.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that I always think is interesting is you know, the whole argument of, organic is better, or this type of whatever it is better. And a lot of times it's just opinion. Um Stephen, hey, thanks for popping in here. Um, so yeah, going to bed hungry when you're poor growing up, like that's very real for a lot of people in the world.
Mhm.
And being able to say, "Oh, I'm not going to eat that because it's not organic or free range or whatever it is a very privileged thing to be able to say."
And I do think that I think truly my stance in agriculture is there's room for everyone. Uh,
Absolutely.
but I sort of, I say this with a large dose of tongue in cheek. Um, and I specifically do it to needle friends of mine who
Yeah.
market their products this way. But I often will say, you know, only organic, 30% markup, 30% less quality. Um,
Hmm.
because if you look at the USDA definition for what organic means, they will tell you it is a labeling and marketing tool only. It
Hmm.
is not indicative of the nutrition of what you're getting.
Absolutely.
So if what you're looking for that is something that's nutritious and healthy, don't use that as your benchmark.
Hmm.
Is it good for you? Is it whole? Um, you know, do you know where it was sourced? Those are things that you should consider if you're truly worried about it. But I also think it's important for people to realize that the United States is the most highly regulated and safest food source in the world.
Hmm.
There's nowhere on the planet where food is safer, period. And it
Yep.
doesn't matter how it's grown or what kind of seed it came from. So, if you buy something from the grocery store or from the farmer's market and it came from your neighbor down the street, I guarantee you it's good for you. End of discussion.
Yep. Yep. And what better way to know exactly where it's coming from than to be able to buy it at their farmer's market or from your neighbor?
Mm-hmm.
um, I think having that connection to your food source is huge when it comes to, appreciating what goes into it. Because having those who haven't ever had that connection or 4 generations removed from the farm, um, don't don't understand if they haven't had that conversation with somebody who is in it every single day.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think that, regulation plays both a positive and negative role.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know what
Okay.
it's like in Oklahoma, but for Washington growers and livestock producers, regulation is the single biggest challenge. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
in ag country, bar none. You know, and I think that's why my job exists, to be quite honest.
Yeah.
Um, some of the things that have come into existence over the last 3 years that I've been working for the Policy Center include with the first, in fact, my very first week on the job, I had to memorize effectively all of the rules for hiring H-2A workers, which is a farm worker program that gives legal visa working status for foreign employees. Because we had a state legislator trying to increase the cost to hire H-2A workers in the state, even though the current cost to just to apply to hire a single H-2A worker is about $1,500.
Oh my gosh.
That doesn't include paying them or housing them or paying for their travel, because all of that is on the farmer. That's just to apply to see if it's okay to hire one person.
So is that $1,500 per person, or can you get, volume discount?
Nope, per person.
Oh my gosh.
There's no there's no volume discount at all. $1,500 per person. Plus Washington State, up until this year, paid the highest wages in the country for H-2A workers. This year we're about 10 cents behind California, but it's still close to $18 an hour.
That's crazy.
It is crazy. And yet we hire 25,000 H-2A workers annually, which makes Washington in the top 5 annually for H-2A hires. So I had to memorize all of that about 5 days into my job.
My God, talk about drinking from a fire hose.
Right. Not to mention, like reading legislation on top of it.
Yeah.
And then that same year, another legislator filed a bill effectively accusing farmers of being slave owners and trying to outlaw slavery again. And then the following year, there was something equally egregious. Then we've had overtime legislation that was passed last year, which phases in overtime. So historically, farms have been exempt from having to pay overtime. Now, this year, farms will begin paying overtime after 55 hours. They'll be required to pay time and a half to all their employees. Mind you, this is in a year when basically all on-farm costs have doubled overnight.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Next year, that overtime threshold is at 48 hours, and then the following year at 40. So they're effectively imposing an office white-collar schedule on a seasonal blue-collar job.
Just goes to show how completely disconnected and have absolutely no clue how it works. Like it reminds me of, like, I don't remember what meme it is, but they're like, no, that's not how this works. That's not how any of this works. Like, no.
And then easily the worst was this year, without asking any ag stakeholders at all. 3 almost identical bills were filed in the House and Senate that would have wiped every farm in a floodplain in the state off the map, because it would have extended the riparian buffer zones in the state from their current up to 100 feet to 250 feet from the high water mark of the floodplain. So,
and how often does it actually reach that high water mark of the floodplain?
Right. So if that's the 100-year mark.
Yeah.
But in an effort to save fish, we have to put in these riparian buffers at the expense of some of the most productive cropland in the state.
Absolutely.
Thankfully, those buffer bills died but they're already talking about how to reintroduce them for the next legislative session.
Oh my gosh. Just makes you
It's
want to kidnap one of them and be like, all right, we're going for a ride. We're going on a field trip. You're going to shadow me for a week and then see if you still have the same opinions. Like,
right. And I think that's the thing. It needs to be, we have farm tours, most states that are heavy in ag do, but they're for like a day.
Yeah.
So you're trying to cram all this stuff into a day. And I'm always sort of like, it'd be great is if we could have a farm tour that lasts like a summer.
Mm-hmm.
Like, why you swing by my place about mid-May, and then I'll let you go home.
Yeah, I'll let you go home.
Right about the time you need to start caucusing for next legislative session, which is about mid-November. And then you can talk to me about what sort of bills you'd like to introduce.
Right.
Because I feel like that's how you get a taste of what it's like to truly be a farmer.
Yeah, I don't think you can, without having, spending some time in the tractor seat or, I still so I've been gone. I've been in Oklahoma for 17 years-ish. I still measure things in hand lines. I'm a pretty good gauge of 40 feet because I grew up carrying the handline pipes. And for those of you who don't know what that means, so in Washington State, we are blessed with irrigation and being able to make it rain whenever we want to because it's typically a very dry environment. Everybody is down here is shocked when I say I grew up averaging 7 inches of rain a year. They're like, what? We make rain. And so a lot of the times, the water comes through these aluminum pipes that are 40 foot long, and you hook them together and you irrigate your fields or whatever. But you don't get that unless you're doing it.
Well, and I think too, I think my screen is frozen, but I am still talking. So
yeah, you're good on my end.
All right. So I do think the other part about that is we are blessed with water in the Columbia Basin, and I think that's a rare thing. A lot of people don't understand that experience. That from basically mid-March through till the end of October-ish, we have water readily available to us. So we can, and more than readily available, we are federally guaranteed 3 acre feet of water. So for people who don't know, what that means is that per acre of land, you are guaranteed 3 feet in depth of water, which is a lot of water. And as a result, the county that Julie and I grew up in is the single most fruitful in production of potatoes in the entire United States.
Absolutely.
More than Idaho.
More than Idaho, even though everybody thinks of Idaho as being the potato state. Yeah.
Shout out to the Washington Potato Commission.
Amen.
And we have all of these other, bounty in sort of specialty crops because we can grow them in a place where you really probably shouldn't be able to grow anything. Except maybe sagebrush and jackrabbits.
Right. Yeah.
So, I think that's that is the beauty of farming here, and it's always sort of one of those things that it sort of takes my breath away that we have legislators who want to see that go away.
Yeah, that's mind-blowing and just disappointing, I think, is the word that I would use.
Yeah. So Stephen's comment about food prices, I do think it's interesting, Stephen, because even with extra costs on the farm end of things, they aren't really connected to food prices in the grocery store. It seems like they should be, but they're not. What you see is that those things kind of get lost in translation. So food prices in the grocery store are very often related to nothing in
Mm-hmm.
terms of on-farm costs. And in fact, as food prices continue to rise in the grocery store, farmers will not see any increase in take-home pay because all of those food prices in the grocery store translate into more income for shippers, for the grocery stores themselves, and uh, for processors, and for all the other people in the middle. So
Mm-hmm.
farmers will maybe get a little bit extra, but not a significant amount extra to offset um, the on-farm input costs that have just gone through the roof in this last
Yeah.
year.
Yeah.
Uh, so I think that part is really challenging for us. Um, and Miss Karen's comment about farmers having their cost and income set by others is absolutely correct. Farmers are what we call price takers, not price makers.
Yeah.
So the way I explain it is we are the only manufacturers who are effectively wholesalers, but our cost is not set by us. It is set by somebody else,
Mm-hmm.
and much different. Um, and so it's really, for most people, that's really hard to grasp because they see the price of a loaf of bread go from $1 to $3, and they assume that that means that farmers are making a grip more money
Mm-hmm.
than before. Um,
Yeah.
and if people haven't looked it up before, I would encourage you to look at the National Farmers Union website. They have a really great graphic called the Farmer's Share.
Mm-hmm.
So what it does is tell you the national average for common food items, and then they break it down and tell you what the farmer's share of those items is. And it's really eye-opening. Um, I try and write something about it every year, particularly at Thanksgiving, um,
Mm-hmm.
because in my family, Thanksgiving is the first family meal in a really long time during the course of the year that we set aside that day um, to spend as a family.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, where farm work pretty well gets set aside because we're more or less done with harvests and other work. So we can really sit around the table and enjoy that day with a minimal amount of chores and really probably not any farm work most of the time.
Yeah.
Uh, and we really do look at that table and count our blessings for the people who put their time and effort and work into bringing those things to our table, whether it's us or other people, because we were for sure not turkey farmers.
Right.
Um, I mean, we grew a couple when I was a kid, and they're mean,
Yeah.
which is to say, I'm really thankful for our poultry producer. Uh,
Absolutely.
so it's I think that farmer's share graphic, I think, is really a really interesting one to look at.
Mm-hmm.
Because
I googled, so I can just share this real quick. We can verify this is the right graphic you're talking about, right?
yep, that's the one.
Okay.
And at Thanksgiving time, they actually do one that is specific to Thanksgiving,
Okay.
which is really cool. So you can see like how much your sweet potatoes cost and how much your dinner rolls cost, and those sorts of
Mm-hmm.
things. Um, but I think it's nice to have a perspective about you know income, grocery cost versus farm income cost,
Mm-hmm.
or farm income, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Because I think about Thanksgiving time is when farmers start trying to spend money so they're not having to pay taxes. And so people start going, well, how come you're driving around a brand new pickup if you're so poor? And
Yeah.
it's really because there is a need to balance out your business.
Mhm.
Um, and when you look at our single biggest asset as farmers, it's our land. And so we have to be able to offset the value of our land so that we effectively have to devalue our land enough so that we're not having to pay back taxes on it, at least in Washington.
Mhm.
And it's a tricky balance.
Absolutely. I think that's way a lot of places for sure. And I did drop a link in the, well, I guess it was on the LinkedIn side chat for that graphic. I can add it on Facebook too. Yeah, I know. I wish I had an image of it, but my mom sent me. It was a picture of Washington State and like an infographic that had all of the different crops and things that are grown within the state. You probably know
Mm-hmm.
exactly what I'm talking about.
It's for the Farm
And
Bureau.
is it? I should see if I
Yeah.
can find it. But that is, to me, is the most incredible illustration of how versatile and productive the state where we grew up is. And I wish, I mean, Oklahoma's a pretty big ag state too. I think I can't remember exactly what number industry it is, but like it's important to know those things, especially, I mean, obviously I'm invested because I grew up in agriculture and I'm still involved through raising cattle and things. Um, but to know like what your state is capable of, I think is really important.
Well, I think that, Washington produces more than 300 different commodities
Mm-hmm.
um, on an agricultural level. And I think there are some really interesting ones. Washington leads the country in the production of wrinkled pea seed, which is this weird niche crop. Obviously, we're the apple state for a reason.
Mm-hmm.
It Washington produces more apples than anywhere else in the United States, far and away. More than that, we are actually the global leader in the production of apples. Um, we also produce more sweet cherries than any other state in the country. Um, and fun fact, Washington grows more oysters than anywhere else in the United States.
Interesting.
Right, which I didn't know until
Mm-hmm.
very recently. So, if you're a shellfish eater, I'm not, I'm allergic, but other people get
Yeah.
your shellfish from Washington folks. Um, and, there's a bunch of other crops that we've sort of cornered the market in, like blueberries and
Mm-hmm.
uh, and raspberries for processing purposes, so for jams and juice. So we're a pretty cool state over here in the PA.
It really is. Like, of
I mean,
course, I'm biased, even though I don't live there anymore. But
don't move here. We're crowded. But come visit.
don't let my mom hear you say that. She'll be like, "No, Pam, shush."
I mean, you can move back, but I don't want other people.
Right? Well, it's like people are leaving California by the droves and coming to Oklahoma. And it's like, oh, we should have an application process before we let you in.
I don't know. I mean, that's not fair. I mean, if you want to come here, that's fine, but you have to
Right.
leave all of your drama and politics behind.
Yes.
Uh, that's
Yep.
mean spirited.
It's okay.
We're open to all. Um, please note my sarcasm.
Yes.
I, I think that what's interesting in this conversation about all of these like things, pressure and farm income and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
I sit also on last year. this the legislature voted to start a statewide 988 emergency crisis line. And so I sit on the subcommittee representing ag and rural mental health needs.
Okay.
And it's a huge deal. It doesn't get talked about very much, and so
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to highlight it because it doesn't get talked about a whole
Absolutely.
lot. And I think there's some things that are really unique in ag, and one of those is that we're all kind of taught to like grit our teeth and just kind of rub some dirt on
Yeah.
it and get on with life, right?
Yeah.
Cow steps on you and your foot is broken, tough.
Yeah.
There's still things to do until the end of the day.
Yeah.
Or, you, in my case, you fall off the top of a combine while you're prepping for wheat harvest. Too bad. You have to just be tough about it until there's time to go to the doctor.
Yep.
And so, which scars you for life and you're afraid of heights forever.
I can relate. I broke my thumb last fall when we were working cows. And at some point, I was sitting on the ground running the tailgate of the squeeze chute, holding my hand, thinking I was going to pass out. But we had to keep going because that's what you do.
Right. So, but it is, in all seriousness, it's a big deal. Um, so they formed this specific subcommittee because, like we were talking about earlier, about ag being community within a community.
Yes.
And the needs in ag are very different. And so I was in a meeting last week about it, and I was like, so I just want to be clear. Have you all thought about how you're going to respond to places where you can't drive an ambulance? And the people who are kind of in charge of how they're going to formulate responses kind of paused and said, well, what do you mean? And I was like, well, there are places on ranches in this state where you can either ride a horse or you can walk.
Mm-hmm.
And that is it. And the only way you can call someone is on like a satellite phone.
Mm-hmm.
So, or a ham radio. So, what are you doing for those folks?
Mm-hmm.
And nobody can answer my question.
But no one had ever asked him to consider that before.
Right. And so I think, we talk about all of these like pressures in agriculture. Mm-hmm. It's like the things that you see like on the farmer's share graphic and those sorts of things. Yeah. I think what I hope people understand or try to take away from things is, there is a very sort of serious component to all of this, as much as we love what we do. And I don't think that anyone should think that we don't, because you choose this life, right? And you choose it because you love it, not because you're like fabulously wealthy, because you're not.
Yeah.
And I mean, maybe you like coffee, but there's like limits.
Yeah.
Too.
You still need to feed your body water, not just straight caffeine.
I mean, we try to limit it to like 2 pots in our house. And we may or may not have the occasional argument, my husband and I, about who took the last of the.
Oh no.
But I think that's the other thing that gets missed. And I don't know if it's in all places, but certainly here, I think the thing that gets missed is that these pressures that get put on farmers, whether they're regulatory or outside pressures about the supply chain or those sorts of things, do take a real toll. And last year in Washington, we lost 6 people to self-inflicted death, and 2 of them were teenagers. And so I think there's, there is a component that we have to remember, and that is that, as we go through all these things that we love about agriculture and about this place in particular, and it is a beautiful place, and I absolutely love it. We still have to remember to support people who are struggling too, and really encourage them to reach out and be and be aware that there are opportunities for help before
Mm-hmm.
they choose to make a decision they can't come back from.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's, I don't know, it's my little soapbox for the last 3 years.
Yeah. Well, I think it needs to be talked about because there's tremendous pressures. And like you said, it doesn't really get talked about. There's not a lot of resources. If there are, people don't know about them.
Mm-hmm.
So it does need to be talked about. That mental health is farmers have feelings too.
I will say, I published an op-ed in the Tacoma News Tribune right after our legislative session ended.
Mm-hmm.
The first day of the legislative session this year, session hadn't even opened. At 6:00 in the morning, I was checking my email for work, and I had an email from a farmer here who was asking me to help them save their farm.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, it's 6 in the morning, and session isn't even technically live. Like, and my husband walked into my office here, and he was like, maybe this isn't the job for you. And a few weeks later, I was in the ER because I thought I'd had a heart attack.
Oh man.
And so I'm all of 40 years old, and I get to carry around nitroglycerin pills. Nothing makes you feel older, as a side note, than having to carry around nitroglycerin pills.
I can imagine.
And it wasn't a heart attack. I am actually a fully healthy human being. But it was stress from worrying about our community,
Yeah.
worrying about, how am I going to help as many people as I can help in the time that I have allotted to me in a given workday.
Yeah.
And it struck me that we need to have more conversations about why farming is important, why it's valuable, and why we take joy and pride in what we do.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think we do. I think we all do, because we wouldn't show up every day doing this if we didn't.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Which I remind myself, come about third hay cutting at 2 in the morning.
Yeah.
When I'm packing my husband breakfast
Yeah.
in a cooler, bleary eyed, going, what time is it again?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love feeding people. I love feeding the world.
Only 2 more cuttings to go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So what would be if there was somebody who was like, I don't know anything about where my food comes from. Like, it's like a 30-second deal that you would say, like, here's what you need to know about where your food comes from.
98% of farms in the United States are family owned and operated. Those farms are 400 acres or less.
Mm-hmm.
Your food comes from people like me, like my friend Julie. It does not come from some unknown corporation. Trust me when I tell you that I love providing for you. And I do it because I love it and because I want you to be happy, healthy, and safe.
Ah, you give me goosebumps. Like, that is phenomenal. And it's so true. Like, I get so discouraged sometimes when people talk about, like, the animal cruelty people. And it's like, I love my cows. Like, I go feed them. It's pouring rain or snow or ice or whatever it is. And we're out there taking care of them because we love them. Like, why would we harm them? Like,
well, I had a conversation with a friend of mine about that. And I said, you can, eating meat and loving your animals doesn't have to be mutually exclusive.
Right.
You can love your animals all the way through the cycle of their life.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we tell our daughter. I mean, she's 6,
Mm-hmm.
and we raise chickens and goats and cows for consumption,
Mm-hmm.
and she's fully aware of that. All of
Yep.
our animals have names. And she pets them and she loves on them, but she also understands that their primary function at the end of their life is that we're going
Mm-hmm.
to eat them.
Yep.
And she she knows that, she understands it, and that's what we teach her, is that you can love something and care for it and still understand that its end function is that it's going to be food that is going to keep you healthy and alive.
Yep.
And I think the trouble is that when you get so removed from your food source,
Yes.
you forget that those things don't have to be mutually exclusive.
Absolutely.
And I think that's what's problematic about having people be 4 to 7 generations removed from their food source.
Yep. If you could wave your magic wand and implement something that would help educate or enlighten those who are, 4 to 7 generations removed, what would that look like?
This is going to sound really bizarre, but I think everyone should have to, sort of like the Israeli army, I think everyone should have to participate in food production at some point.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to say they should be conscripted into food production,
Yeah.
but I do think that everyone, for a growing season, you
Mm-hmm.
should have to fully participate in where your food comes from.
Mm-hmm.
Whether that's, working on a cattle ranch, or uh, working at, a fruit and vegetable farm, or, whatever the case may be. I think everyone should have to truly put their hands in the dirt and touch where their food comes from.
Yep.
Because I think once you get involved in that process,
Mm-hmm.
you have a much better understanding of, A, do I want this to be something that I do for a living? Probably not, and that's fair.
Yeah.
But more specifically, when you go to a store for the rest of your life, you are going to remember that there are people involved in that process.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yep. Oh, this has been so good. So before we sign off, I want to share a couple of pictures. I love pictures, and my mom is a picture junkie, and so I told you guys when we got started that Pam and I go way back,
Mm.
and um, so I'm gonna share
Oh, some vintage fair
some
picture.
vintage fair pictures. So I can't even begin to guess what year this is. I
We were
may
must be showing steers, maybe
this is in the horse barn.
horse barn. I don't know.
So I was maybe a freshman at the oldest. So that would have been like 99-ish, maybe. But we go back even further than that.
That has to be when I was showing steers, that first one, because I don't
Yeah.
know where my cousin would be at the fair. That's
So
my
just
mom and me.
yeah. And I'm probably 6 or 7 in this one, maybe.
Yeah, that's gonna be sheep days.
Yeah, those definitely sheep days.
Yeah.
But it's so funny.
Mm.
But I just think it's awesome that we grow up in 4-H in agriculture, and then we move away, and you truly have found your way back to ag with your role at the Washington Policy Center as the ag. I can't remember your title now.
It's ag
person.
Research. Yeah.
And farming as well. Like, I think that is just amazing. And I raise cows, so I'm still involved. But
yeah.
But it's like, I think I put it on my post today. It's like, you can take the girl away from the farm, but you can't take the farm out of the girl.
That is very true.
Yeah. So, well, thank you so much for coming on tonight. I really enjoyed this. I hope others who were here found it enlightening. I'm definitely going to go back and clip what you said earlier that gave me goosebumps. And I think that will make a very good thing to share around in the future.
I think so.
So thank you so much. I do want to plug my live for next week, the 26th, I think, of April. Is that next Tuesday?
Yes, it's my wedding anniversary.
It's your wedding anniversary? Well, happy early anniversary.
Thank you.
I hope you get to celebrate.
Who knows? Well,
maybe you can go ride for a round in the tractor. You know,
I know. I'll sit in the buddy seat.
There you go. Well, I will think of you when I am talking with my friend Anthony Jones on Joyful Julie Live next week at 7 Central. So anything else before we go?
No, I had a great time. Thanks for having me. It was lovely to visit with you.
You too. So thank you, and I will chat with everyone later.